So the latest Harvard Caps Harris poll is out, and you cover a lot of ground in this poll, Mark, as you do every month. But give me your top takeaways from this month's reading.
Well, look, I think this month, and we've been doing this poll for 7 years, this month I think Trump's ratings stabilized, didn't move up or down, and I think he began to get traction on crime. I think he's now kind of taken his focus from what I would say is immigration first to then kind of tariffs all over in the middle to really kind of leading a national crackdown on crime. And I think you're seeing what I would call generally favorable response to it.
Let's talk about crime because you do go into the Washington, D.C. situation quite a bit. Was there anything in that surprised you? I mean, I know there's been some other data out there suggesting that, look, this is one of those issues that, most Americans do believe crime is a problem in major cities around the country and that it needs to be dealt with. But was there anything from the data that surprised you about what's going on in Washington, D.C.?
Well, look, I think 54% said that they approve of the president's approach relative to using the National Guard in D.C. Look, I think it's interesting right now in general. Anytime I apply the word Trump, it is very hard to get above 50%. If I take his name off the policies, I get 60, 70, 75%, even 80% for, say, locking up criminal people who are here without documentation or here illegally. But when you put his name, the country is so polarized on Trump, and the Democrats will not concede a single inch of anything that the president does, that it's hard for him to get above 50. So when he gets 54% approving, I'm going, wow, that's like, a normal, used to be 65, okay? Because that means I know that there are other people who approve of it, but won't approve of it because we put the name Trump in the questionnaire.
One of the things that there was sort of shockingly bipartisan agreement on, one of the data points in this poll, Mark, was that everyone thinks, Democrats, Republicans, and independents believe that Trump is going to do this somewhere else. This is the Washington, D.C. is only the first, and that this is going to happen in other cities around the country.
Well, look, in fairness to Trump, and kind of, I did an X post on this, when you look at it, we lose about 25,000 people a year to crime. And we lose about 50,000 a year to fentanyl. So that's 75,000 lives every year, right? And forget Gaza, forget Sudan, that's right here in America. And it's really been surprising when you think about it, how these problems have been more or less almost put under the rug. Nobody's talking about the 75,000 dead every year from murders and fentanyl. And I think the president is attacking them with a 2x4. And I think ultimately the Democrats can raise all the hootenanny that they want to raise about the methods he's using. But the truth of the matter is they've let the problems fester to getting the unbelievable numbers of dead. I mean, again, we're mourning a church shooting today with 4 dead. Okay, well, there's 4 dead every day in one of our major cities. I mean, it's incredible how much we are not paying attention to the problems. And it is somewhat surprising to me that the Democrats think they can get political advantage by opposing rather than compromising on these issues.
Yeah, and that was another finding, is you got to give Trump credit for at least kickstarting the conversation, because it was like 75% of people, they are aware of what he's doing in Washington, D.C. They're aware of this crackdown on crime. So they have definitely read about it. Whether they agree with him or not, different story. Okay, moving on. It seems like, Mark, that clearly the economy, inflation, still the number one issue on the minds of Americans. And there Trump is not performing as well. He's lost a little bit of altitude in this first, 6-7 months of his presidency.
Well, I think he's getting his lowest ratings on the economy and inflation at 41%. I think he has a strategy. He believes in that strategy. But in at least the short term here, he is significantly held back by fears about tariffs. Many of them were way overblown, and I think even Fed Chairman Powell finally acknowledged that a tax increase is not inflation. that the central bank can do something about. In fact, it's a tax that contracts the economy. I think he's counting on, when you look at it, he put in the tax cuts. He's trying to shift basically make it more expensive for you to buy something overseas, comparatively less expensive to produce here. And he needs lower interest rates as part of this equation to get things going. And so he's leaning pretty heavily, whether it will work or not, or whether or not the Fed is just going to get there on their own. I think that's a problem. But when you look at the poll, you would say that his former strong suit, the economy, is now his weak spot. And he's got what I think is about a year. A year from now, people will make their final judgments on how his economic policy is working or not. And it will be the single biggest factor in the midterms. 42% right now see their economic condition is still worsening. Even though that's better than it was before, it's too high a number.
Mark, you also cover foreign policy in this. There was a section on Ukraine and Gaza. And the one thing that jumped out at me is that large majorities of folks thought that he was not going to be able to solve these two conflicts. Obviously, he's had some success in solving some other conflicts, but they look at these conflicts and think that even he might not be able to get these two conflicts resolved.
Well, first of all, it is a public that is razor focused on domestic policy. When I ask people how they're voting, they may be reading a lot of news on foreign policy, but it is down at 2% of the percentage who are seriously voting on it. I think on the Ukraine, the president got in the poll credit for giving it a try, but people basically think that Putin is intransigent, that the meeting was fundamentally unsuccessful because it didn't produce anything concrete, and that he's generally speaking, too lenient on Putin. So again, he's going to see whether he's resolved it. You would say, I would rate that as credit for giving it a try, skepticism that he's going to get there. I think there's a little bit more belief that he might have a chance at resolving what's going on in the Mideast. I think you saw very clearly, about 3/4 support Israel over Hamas. That's a number that's down a couple of points. It was as high as 80%. Generally speaking, I think you see concern about people in Gaza, but quite interestingly, because I asked the kind of questions that I used to ask at the White House. So we kind of probe the next level. People think that there are food shortages in Gaza, but they blame Hamas. And 61% blamed Hamas for that, not Israel, because Hamas simply won't give up the hostages, and right now is holding on even though they have lost a war. So I think that you see continued general support for Israel versus Hamas, even though you see a lot of democratic defections, and you see concern about Gaza, but actually more blame on Hamas. Though significant blame, relative to Israel. I won't say that it's 61-30. There's still a significant proportion blaming Israel, but it's nowhere near a majority. And I think when you look at the polling, it's a kind of a difficult situation because they rate Hamas as the lowest of the low, and yet, the American people, they are conflict avoiders, right? That's why America generally doesn't get involved in foreign policy, doesn't support wars and military action, for particularly long periods of time, historically. But I would say on this, they definitely support the Ukraine. They definitely support Israel. They're on board with Trump trying to end the war. They just don't know how he's going to do it.
Just a couple of minutes left, Mark, and I want to switch back to domestic politics. You mentioned the election. So you had a favorability rating for the parties in here. And I think the GOP was 47 approved, 53 disapproved, so -6. Democrats were 41 approved, 59 disapproved, so -18. And I'm just interested in your take on sort of the Democratic Party brand. We've seen it in a lot of different data, showing it at lows, historic lows in some cases. And yet we saw this special election that took place in Iowa, just the other day, where the Democrat won by pretty easily in a district that Trump carried by double digits just, last November. So What's your take on where the Democrats stand as sort of a national brand, and then how you expect them to maybe perform in the midterms right now, if the midterms were held, in the next 10 days?
Well, it'd be a tricky one if the midterms were held in the next 10 days. Look, the Democratic Party is at its lowest ratings. They've come up a bit from their super lows, but generally they used to be close to 50% and they're down at 41. Republicans are getting higher ratings, but people are still holding on to their partisan suits, right? Even though Democrats are unhappy with the Democratic Party, which some have to be, they're not switching their vote yet. And so the truth is, it's going to take a campaign. That's what campaigns are all about, right? If we held the election today, it would be meaningless, right? And special elections are usually pretty bad bellwethers. I think that if the election was held today and the Republicans got their message out, which in a campaign, which they don't get because the press kind of suppresses most of their message most of the time, I think the Republicans would eke it out if it was held today. But I think it's all going to depend on how people assess the economy a year from now and whether or not Trump can say, look, we're back to the best economy in the world. That's what he's shooting for. He has a set of policies. It's very determined. Is he right? We're going to see. And I think that really is going to be, in this case, the big determinant. I'd say the biggest concern, if I were Republicans, is that you're losing a lot of the Hispanic support that was gained in the election. People underestimate the fact that it was the Hispanic vote, not the white young male vote, that really was the key determinant of the presidential election. And they are very sensitive to how the economy is going because they're working class voters that want to get ahead.